I'm actually really excited for this particular webinar. When Jen and I first hopped on a call to try and come up with an idea for this webinar, we pretty much clicked straight away, and within 10-15 minutes we had the idea, which rarely ever happens for me anyway, because we kind of had that whole conversation around how for a lot of people, especially at a senior level, employee engagement is becoming a bit of a term that is engagement for engagement's sake. And so what is the solution to that? And we both thought that the secret lies in shaking up the reputation of internal comms not being the numbers or the metrics people, but doing so in a way that kind of plays to our strengths. So hopefully in this session, you'll kind of see how you can use metrics to influence the organization, what the state of IC metrics are today. And I've got some kind of personas at the end as well to kind of help you divide up your different metrics for the right stakeholders. So just very brief introductions. My name is Kaz. I am Employee Experience Industry Lead at Unily. That means I basically get to go away and read all the research, the data, work with people like Jen to kind of understand the employee experience landscape and the internal comms landscape. I then get to kind of share that internally into Unily for product development, but I also get to share it externally, which is why I'm here today. And I am joined by Jen, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kaz. Yes, as Kaz says, so I'm Jen, and my day job is I'm Chief Exec of the Institute of Internal Communication. The IOIC is a membership body, a not-for-profit organisation. It's all about helping internal communicators advance their skills and their practice and how they go about it. And I have the wonderful job, like Kaz, of having such an overview of what's going on in the professional community and all the things that we do, all the guidance we produce. So hopefully today we can bring between the two of us some of that to bear to help you in these metrics challenges, so that we can help you create that more influence in your organisation.
Exactly. We've tried for the first time putting like QR codes up there. So if anyone wants to connect on LinkedIn, I know I sometimes share blogs and vlogs and things like that. So feel free to connect if you want to. So very brief about Unily. You probably heard of us. I know we've got a lot of customers on the call as well. But really our mission is to kind of create meaningful digital experiences that unite enterprises, powering better work for everyone. So essentially it's about elevating the employee experience, and the primary way we do that is through Unily, our employee experience platform. For anyone that is interested to kind of learn a bit more about the Unily product, you can always sign up after for a product demo. Alternatively, there are so many reports, guides out there, the likes of Clearbox, Forrester, where we're listed as a leader, as well as Nielsen Norman, if you've got a bit more of like a UX angle to intranet. So I always like reading the Nielsen Norman Best Intranet Awards, and we consistently perform the best of that. So that is Unily, and that's kind of why we get into the nitty-gritty of this stuff. If you like events, but you're also missing kind of live events, we have our flagship conference, Unite. That is September 13th to the 14th. We're back in person. We're going to be in London this year. So if you are able to make it, then please do go to that link, unit.com/unite. There's a little discount code there as well if you want to join us. We always have really amazing speakers. Last year I got to speak to Stephen Bartlett. The year before that, I got to speak to Tan France on like the power of difference, and we've got Stephen Fry and Grace Beverly this year. So really cool speakers, and it kind of takes a zoom out on employee experience. It's not just techie. So great for internal communicators. So let's dive into the content. So really a lot of this comes about from, we probably wouldn't have been able to have this webinar go back 4 or 5 years, because internal comms didn't necessarily, most organizations have the level of influence you would need to really make the change that we would want to do. But what we're seeing from the data is that 83% of comms leaders reported that their C-suite influence has grown. And I don't know, Jen, you get to work with a lot of different organizations. I've heard it from a lot of our customers, but does that resonate with what you've heard, and why do you think that is?
Yeah, absolutely. If you say organizations have been through a lot, we've been through a lot in the last 3 years. And I think the challenges that the C-suite people are facing is putting a lens on communication as a problem solver to that challenge. And certainly the conversations that I have with members and professionals now versus sort of 3, 4, 5 years ago, where they are being brought in to really look at some really key business issues, is far greater. And I think the other thing as well, when I look at, we talk to our members every year on what they're doing around their skills. And in our latest one at the end of last year, our priorities for our own professional skills development as a professional community is strategy and planning, and then is secondly influence and advising. Comms, though, and measurement is number 4, but that will be the trick to getting number 1 and number 2.
Yeah, it's very true, because a lot of these leaders have kind of built up practices and ways of working all built around data, and so kind of internal comms was snuck in as influencers, but need the data as well to support it. So that's really exciting to see. And it's not just like a one-way path. What's good is that employee retention has essentially become a top priority for organizations. It was actually one of our trends for the Unily trends for the year is retention over recruitment. Finally, people have wised up to understanding that we get value from retaining our employees, and it's better cost-wise, but of course from alignment-wise as well. So it basically means that leadership will be coming to internal comms, and hopefully after this webinar, you'll be armed with different metrics, different ideas, concepts, which will help you kind of facilitate those conversations and make change, and ultimately just retain employees, which is probably what we all want to do, have happier, more engaged employees. So when we were going through this webinar, speaking to Jen, and I said, there's a couple of things that I really want from you, given your experience. Firstly, like, where is this go? Where are internal metrics, IC metrics going? What are you hearing on the ground? Where's the movement? Mm-hmm. And also, I wanted to hear, given that you work with so many organizations, what are the 3 common mistakes that you see happen from internal communicators when it comes to metrics? So I'll let you kind of answer that one.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kaz. Yeah, and it was when Kaz asked me that question, it is a thought-provoking and thoughtful question. And I think that I've been with the Institute for 7 years now. And I'm also a marketeer by trade. I've also worked in the market research industry and in the consumer insights industry. And it's been a fascinating journey to see how that's transitioned across and where we are then as a professional community on that. And I think that, a lot has happened. Measurement is rapidly evolving. We have more tools, more techniques, more things in our grasp to help us to improve and to demonstrate our impact. But I also think we've been on this journey now of trying to, when I first started out, we were very much like, looking at what we're doing, what's our click-through rates, what does that tell us? I think we're really shifting now towards this focus on data-driven decision-making. And what do I mean by that? Is that I think that, we've been very much kind of led by our instincts of what great communication makes. But as we now deal with much more dispersed, challenging employees, challenging makeups, we know that actually data is key to enabling us to make decisions. And where is that key? And I think there's 2 things that I would point out in terms of that data-driven decision making. Is one around, yes, data enables us to, of course, demonstrate our outcomes, demonstrate our impact, and how we can use that data to first of all go in and say, hey, like Kaz just talked about employee retention, how can we link what we do to that particular issue? We know that. But I think also the thing that we're starting to focus more on as well is how we can use data as an improvement tool, as a continual improvement tool in our own work, rather than just being, well, we've done something, so here's what it means. Actually, how do we embed this data decision-making into our comms? So let me give an example of what I mean by that. So we have limited resources, limited time. We are trying to reach and gain the attention of, let's just say, if we think about all the people, millions of workers, millions of employees, and actually, rather than sort of doing something and going, did that look at how we're using data in our everyday to make that decision? How are we thinking about where's good to put the channel? What content? What topics? Where it's going? What do people want to know? What do they want to hear? By using that sense of that data, it's enabling us to decide now as what our internal comms strategies are and how to continually improve the communication we put in place, from its execution, its tactics, and then, of course, link it into the business outcomes. So I think that data-driven, embedding that data is helping us think about how we improve, but how we demonstrate our outcomes as well. So we are, I think, from where I was when I started, really becoming a more data-driven professional community.
Yeah, I remember
on the next thing,
kind
the
of
thing that I'm seeing, go on, Taz,
I
yeah?
remember kind of early days when internal comms started to work with metrics. It was take anything and everything, and metric was good in itself. But good to hear it's kind of like evolving. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it definitely is. And I think that because, I mean, one of the things that we've certainly learned in the last 3 years as well, Kaz, and I'm sure you have those, all the people listening, is we are time poor. We are resource poor. We are sometimes trying to do too much. But actually then, so we're adding more and more channels and more techniques to more challenging situations. Whereas if we bake in that, what we're learning now is if we use data, actually we'll make better decisions of how we execute our work for the most optimum outcome, whatever that might be. And it's going to be really powerful in guiding us. Because often I'm sure people, we get asked a lot, send this out, do this. It's that point also to say yes, but also to say no. As to why we do something. I think the other thing that I'm seeing more of as well is this shift towards more frequent feedback. And again, let me give an example of what I mean by that. It's the dialing up of listening and the dialing up of how we go about that. So in the first point, we're talking about data to look at our impact, our conversion, and outcome, a statistic. But then the second point is actually the annual engagement survey is not enough. In the pace that we're working at and the way that we're doing things, we need to be looking at more frequent feedback. So adopting methods that go into that. So for example, whether that's a quarterly or a biannual, but at this point, we're bringing in that kind of employee sentiment analysis, the emotion, reaching out, focus groups, the qualitative, your town halls. There are points in our work that we collect data and information at an enormity of rate, and we need to do that more frequently. Because what does that also do? So it also allows us to identify the issues in the organization and to take that to a leader and go, hey, look, this is working. Our line managers are saying X, our line managers are saying Y. If we don't fix this, this is not going down well. There's a cultural problem here. So embedding those more regular points of feedback that collect sentiment, emotion, that qualitative piece, through a variety of methods, and whether that's tuning into your listening programs, whether that's looking at your social channels, whether that's your events, whether that's all the things that you're doing. I'll give an example of something as well that I saw a great example of this recently, and it's a podcast that we recorded a few weeks ago that will come out from the work they were doing at First Bus. So they do quarterly surveys, sentiment, emotion, okay? Then they have their data and they look at that. Then the chief people officer sits down with the CEO on a quarterly basis and looks at that and what needs to be done and what needs to be addressed. What have they found in that? They have worked out, for example, as a business, you talk about retention, it costs them £7,000 for each new recruit. And then through that quarterly listening, they're finding out the shift patterns were wrong. People didn't feel valued. There wasn't enough recognition. Right, we've got that issue. Let's fix it. Let's solve it. And let's check back on that feedback, check back on that data point and see how the two correlate. So that's how that kind of shift is happening. And it can really push the needle on finding the solutions to some of those big data points that we might unearth at the first step.
That approach is actually quite similar to what I've heard from Pearson. I'm not sure if they're on the call, but Kim from Pearson was saying how they kind of like, for onboarding employees, new employees, they basically put them in a block, put them through a process, have those questions at the end of that process, see how it was going, what worked about their platform as well, and they would then kind of give that a score, see what outcomes they came out of that, fed that back into the next round, and then you kind of got like a next cohort, which is like actively, the data is iteratively improving every time, so you kind of like take in the incremental gains. So yeah.
It gives you that benchmark, that frequency, an annual engagement. And because we're moving so fast and our emotions are changing so much. And it also goes back to, I'm sure you've heard that, Kaz, the iceberg analogy, isn't it? That 4% of leaders know the problems at the top and 100% of the staff. And actually, if you've got those problems that are not being unearthed, those are the things that actually can be the biggest solutions. And that then leads nicely to how then you can see how that integrates with a business outcome. you're getting that point of data. You're getting that point of whether that's your data of what people are reading, what people are resonating, what people are engaging with, from then to your data point around your listening and your focus groups and your qualitative and all that that's building into it. Then you're starting to make a link between how we communicate, the feeling towards the emotion, then towards that outcome, which might be, we've talked a lot about retention, but it could also be things around linking into, we talked about it, Kaz, wasn't it? This thing where we're obsessed with engagement as the score that we need to, as the marker of it. But it's going outside of that around what's employee satisfaction, what is attrition, what is sickness, what are all those big data points actually is going, because engagement, it might not always lead you down that right path, that you have to put it into that bigger context and looking outside
you also want,
of what those things mean.
You also want employees that are kind of aligned with what you're doing. So one of the issues that when we first spoke about the engagement thing was that obviously engagement is a good outcome, but it doesn't tell the whole story. And I feel like it's become a bit of a buzzword, especially at a leadership level, where it can be like, oh, let's have some free pizza on a Friday, and that equals engagement. But actually, like when we start to link it to business outcomes, we can understand a bit better what changes need to happen. And how we need to engage employees.
Absolutely. And, and that's the thing, measuring wider than that as well. And also, thinking around employee advocacy, are you measuring how people would talk about your organization externally? What does that mean? It starts to bring that link together, perhaps. And then I think the final thing, and obviously you guys talk a lot about employee experience, where I'm seeing there's a real shift now towards focusing across the employee experience and how we measure and understand across that dynamic. So what does that mean? So yes, like we say, engagement has been a core outcome and will continue to be one of the outcomes, but our outcomes are so much bigger than that. So again, looking at understanding the every touch point of an organization, from the onboarding to how they feel, to their treatment, to their recognition. Are pay and benefits clearly communicated? Do they understand those sorts of side of things? How do we communicate at points of policy change and how that's embedded? How do people feel at the informity point? So rather than thinking, has my one piece of communication had enough click-throughs, we are way beyond that point now of thinking about that whole experience. And with that as well, really getting to know our audiences again and really putting them into more clearer buckets and using the combination of, I would say, sort of behavioral insights, to put that, to understand how we can think about our people in a new way, embed those views and emotions along with the outcomes across the expanse of the employee experience, which is, and I would say engagement is perhaps one factor of that.
Yeah, I'm super keen on that one in particular, because if we look at like customer experience teams in terms of their organization completely shape themselves around the best thing to do for the customer. And so they will reorganize over time very quickly to work for the customer. But if you look at those kind of like internal facing teams, they still can be quite stuck in those more traditional structures, which can be fine. But this kind of focus on employee experience will hopefully help people kind of unite around the employee life cycle to make genuine difference, rather than just like sitting in those silos.
Yeah. I mean, like I say, my background, I've been talking about customer experience for donkey's years, and the work that they were doing and how they're designing it, and the surreptitious nature of behavior, and it's also emotionally based as well, and embedding that in and thinking about that at every touch point. And then the metrics they're looking at are important, but they're also people that are using that metrics to make continuous improvement, rather than thinking it's always an end, because there is never an end.
Yeah, it never ends. So this was the one that I remember saying, like, please can you let me, what are the like three, because the reality is a lot of comms people come from a storytelling background with people. And so, this is our course, this is why we do what we do. So there must be some common things that you're seeing picked up. We're just trying to plug those gaps. What are those three things that you see happen?
Yeah. It was a really good question, Kaz, and I was like, oh, okay, pick the three that are hopefully the most helpful, and actually sometimes more difficult than others, but hopefully can be quite something to help easily solve. I think the first most common mistake, should we say, or thing that lets us down is that we don't define actually what it is that we're trying to achieve. We want to just collect such a volume of information, it becomes drowning, and then we don't know what we're doing with it. Whereas actually it comes back to that piece around strategy and planning. I would be sitting down thinking about, what are we trying to achieve as a comms function? And also, what information do I have now on what needs to be improved? And what do the leaders and the business and the people and the organized strategy need? So it's really starting to sit at that point, because with comms, we could be everything everywhere, and trying to boil the ocean, for want of a better phrase, is incredibly difficult. So I think for me, the biggest mistake I see is going to the metric as the end point, and almost rather than sitting down and go, what are we trying to achieve? What do we want people to know and feel? How does that link to a business outcome? And therefore, what is the most valuable information we can gather to help us demonstrate that, rather than trying to gather everything and make sure that's
once
correct.
you go through that process, it will be, otherwise it can be kind of, you're looking for, it might be like confirmation bias. You may have something, try and map it to something when actually that isn't the right flow, that isn't the right data to support what needs to be done.
Yeah, and it's also as well, if you present that volume of data to, say, which we're talking about influencing C-suite earlier on, you need to find the bit that's going to resonate with them. There's the bits that we need to keep for ourselves, and the bits that are actually doing that. So actually going into the business and going, what's the issues, what needs solving, and defining your dashboard or your method to display that with clarity and focus for your various audience groups that you may be trying to work with, is really key to helping you achieve that set of influence, I think.
Yeah.
The second mistake, I would say, not mistake, I think this is more of a challenge. I'm going to say this is a challenge.
Yeah, you did say that before. You wanted to frame it as a challenge, yeah.
Because we're not, we're all trying to do the best we can. Is I think it is looking at data in isolation, and we look at a click-through rate as one thing versus an attrition rate as something else, or we're looking at what we're hearing at a town hall, or what we're hearing in our listening programs. Actually binding that data together. So once again, you've understood what you're trying to achieve, what you're trying to understand. And then it's sort of thinking through, well, but what all the data, and then how do I bind that data together to tell the holistic story? Because that's when the insight comes out. Quantitative can give you indicators, qualitative can give you then, with against that, then the depth beneath that to find the thing that needs solving, or the thing that needs addressing, or the case of why you need to make change. So it is, in the market research industry, big data was huge, was combining your market research, your club card data with your customer satisfaction data. That's when you start to really, with your observational research and whatever, that's when you start to make really compelling insights. So I think it's sometimes, as well as when we can combine metrics with engagement surveys, with sentiments, with listening data, that's when the real insight will hopefully also be drawn out of that.
I actually think that's really good advice, because I think if you're unfamiliar with metrics, when you first start to get into metrics, you can be tempted to just take the data and present it, and actually not really and actually the value that internal communicators have here is the ability to tell a story. So kind of like understanding, it's almost like you need to think about the story first, what with the data, what it's telling you, and then use the data to kind of supplement and tell that story.
It is. It's like your sentiment might find something, going, okay, right, we need to look at this closely. Let's then focus in on this issue for a more investigational. Actually, let's look at what we gathered here and see what that does to create that compelling piece of information. And then that leads nicely on as well, is that, and I think that data can feel really overwhelming. It feels like you need to be some kind of statistician or mathematician to be able to do that. And it does feel like that, and it can be overwhelming. And we do have to get sometimes comfortable with our spreadsheets and with our things and around that. But actually remember, again, going back to that wealth of information, is forgetting the facts and stories make a compelling combination. The biggest way is to go in there and are we telling the stories of our data, of our measurement? Bring it to life, use our storytelling techniques. The market research industry, the customer insight industry have been doing that for years. They've been learning, how can I bring storytelling into data? We've already got it. So let's use our ability of storytelling and facts to go in and tell a story to a leader. And also don't worry sometimes about perfection. You're thinking about that speed and that pace. So what have I found out quarterly? Right, there's a big stat here. Here's the story from one of our workers. Here's a piece of that's come out. It backs up with perhaps another piece of data around attrition rates. Tell that story of what that means and bring facts and storytelling together.
Sure, cool. Okay, so we've kind of we've spoken about a little bit of this and what these practices are, but it's probably good just to kind of cement some of the practices that we've taken away from that. Like, I love the bake data into your day one. I think if you are just waiting until the end of the month and pulling a report and then presenting it, that's not the right not the right approach. It's kind of like making sure, how is it intrinsically linked into your role? And we spoke about that last time, that really resonated with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Make it part of your everyday. Look into it, find what's going to bake it. And that helps you get more comfortable with it. But it also helps you become, we're so focused sometimes as well on demonstrating our impact, which we need to do, but also focus our industry, our understanding on how we can use it to help us become problem solvers before problems occur, before issues occur. And by baking that sense of data into your day, you can spot things. You can be something that enables you to be that strategic advisor. You've got the year, you're going in, look, this is happening. I can see this boiling up. Here's my data. I'm looking at it every day. Let's address it. Let's do something around it, rather than waiting until that end point. So getting comfortable with data every day, whether that's looking at your dashboard or you're checking in the conversations, or you're just tuning into languages, or you're at a town hall, make that part of your daily habit. And the second one, isn't it, that is there around pinpoint the issues. We've talked about it enough, but go beyond engagement. Do go beyond it. Think bigger, think wider, find those KPIs, find those things, whether it's culture, whether it's understanding, whether it's satisfaction, whether it's links to a business outcome. Go beyond thinking about, if our engagement score is good, then that means we're good, because comms is far more impactful across a number of outcomes than just engagement.
Sure. So if someone wanted to kind of take away like a quick model that they can kind of implement and go, right, okay, I've got this plan now to go away and be a bit more data driven, get comfortable with metrics and influencing. This is your is this your kind of like model to do that, your takeaway model?
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, plan, put your metrics together, know what you want to do. The conversation pieces, make sure you have conversations with your people, but also with your stakeholders, because some data that's challenging to access. Have those conversations, identify the methods, what metrics, what tools, what things are going to work best for what you're trying to achieve. Analyze holistically and follow up. Remember, particularly when we're doing listening work, make sure that feedback loop is continuously embedded within your employees as well.
So when I kind of like got all that insight from Jen, one of the good messages I took away from it was that actually, hopefully you're watching this thinking, oh gosh, I'm going to have to do loads of extra work. I'm going to get loads more surveys out and things like that. Actually, if you break down where's all that data coming from, we'll look at some of the data examples in a bit. Actually, they boil down pretty much to these 4 areas. And hopefully you're engaging in at least 3, probably almost all of them. And they are your kind of age-old employee engagement survey, the classic. Of course, it still has its place. And especially when you're kind of working with HR, there'll be some metrics in there that you want to look at, EMPS being a key one. Then you've got your kind of like internal comms audit. This is probably an area I actually feel like some organizations put some effort into, but I feel like there's always more that could be done to really understand like the demand from employees for your comms. What do they want to see? Where do they want to see it? What format do they want to see it in? and then kind of balancing that with the demand, like understanding how much content have you delivered, where did you deliver it, what was the engagement rates, and kind of if you put those two things together, you can kind of get an idea of, is your supply kind of fulfilling that like demand from employees in a way, and that can start to tell stories. For example, if you're trying to make a case to a leader that actually they need to start creating more video content, if you can tell that story via, okay, well, this is the demand and this is how much video content we put out, and it's way out of sync. We actually have like a kind of content stream planner. I think if you fill in the feedback form at the end of this, you'll be able to kind of like download it, and it gives you a way to kind of understand your content streams, do a bit of an internal comms audit. But I know some of you will be doing that already, so that's good to see. Of course, you've got your like culture inputs as well, your data sources. So these tend to be a bit more qualitative, but of course you have things like pulse surveys, your listening activities, your focus groups. So however you keep your ear to the ground and understand the culture in your organization. And of course, if you've got like a nice shiny platform, you'll have your platform metrics as well. So there may be different dashboards. We've referenced some of the kind of like the click-throughs, the views, all that sort of stuff that's coming from your intranet, your employee experience platform, or other system. And so no data you need to use coming outside of that. You may have to kind of collaborate with other people that have that data to pull it together. HR being a key one, but ultimately that data is coming from these data sources. It's just kind of hopefully using what you have and maybe reimagining it and tell it in order to influence. So this, what I wanted to do is basically say, before we get into the data, I think one thing that's really important to know, and Jen, you kind of inspired this, is like when you think about the story, it's really important that if you're presenting any data to any leaders or you're using it to influence, that you present it alongside the context. And what I mean by that is there's, of course, internal context. For example, you may have just launched a new product or a new service. There may have been a restructure. There may have been like changes to teams. There may have been a new platform introduced. So all of these things within an organization can and will affect what an employee wants to engage with, how they feel about that. And also you might, for example, get certain asks. For example, if a CIO may be launching a new platform, there may be a way you can kind of like get in collaboration. So with that internal context, then you've got a different type of ask. How are they using it along something else? What's the sentiment of that? So that's your kind of internal context, what's happening in the organization. And when you're presenting that data, anything that you think is key needs to be presented there. Likewise, you've got your external context. So anything that's happening outside the organization that might impact those metrics. Now that may sound like a bit of a given, but actually you'd be surprised. It's things like even things like local politics. If you're a global organization, you may have different things going on in different regions that mean the metrics come out different. Holidays, for example, I actually, like early in my career, I had an embarrassing example of this, where we recently launched like an internet platform, and I would pull together like this report every month where I'd look at the most popular stories and blah, blah, blah. And then we looked at it in January and was going through the data with like the team of stakeholders, and our adoption massively dropped off after like 3 months. And everyone's getting a bit worried, like, why is it not working? Have people like boycotted it? Like, what's happened? And obviously it was December, so it was Christmas, so no one was really around. So there was a natural, like, there was external context that means the way you look at that data is completely different. And there's also this kind of industry benchmarks area. So benchmarks, I think, are super important. I think it's also important to understand what your goals are as an organization and where you're going. But like the Gallagher, for example, the state of the sector report is really helpful in trying to, if you're trying to make a case for more resource, for example, helping you kind of benchmark that and see how other organizations are doing. So you kind of put all that together. You're not just presenting plain data anymore, because the finance team can do that. But the internal comms team can kind of put all this together and tell a story in order to influence. Sorry.
I was just going to add as well, Kaz, to that. I think that the other thing as well, when you're talking about external context and that sort of thing, is also as well, don't be afraid sometimes that there's great resources out there, from whether it's YouGov polling, whether it's ComScore, whether it's Ipsos. They're producing what's worrying the world, what's on people's minds, how a general consumer consumption habits changing and preferences, and sometimes actually that can really give you that context as well, and to look at, well, why is that shifting? Well, if you look at the wider world, or you bring that in, or actually what's on the mind of people right now in their personal world, or what are they consuming, or how is that affecting how they feel towards things. The cost of living crisis is a great example of that. That's been the top of everyone's worry mind. So therefore then and then you start looking on your own platform saying, well, actually, what are people searching for? What are people clicking for? And what's going on there? So using that sense of that can really help to kind of map those two things together sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And also, yeah, you have a good point about, I always like to look at, we end up ultimately mirroring some of these external trends, like the content preferences ultimately come from things like TikTok, BeReal, and slowly make their way forwards. And so thinking about that, also having, I guess, like an awareness of not necessarily just the here and now, but also who are the type of people you're trying to recruit, what are their preferences, and so you're making sure you have kind of diverse data as well is super important.
Yeah.
So to kind of like close this out, basically we've put together a little model that looks at kind of common roles in your C-suite and what sort of internal comms metrics you might serve up to them depending on who they are, what hat they're wearing, and what their priorities are essentially. We'll start with kind of our numbers people, typically our technical people, our CFO and our CIO. So what's actually quite interesting to know is that the CFO role in itself has changed quite heavily over the past 3 to 5 years. They used to be just about, just about the numbers and wouldn't really get involved with business operations to the same extent. However, now we all understand how employee experience is intrinsically linked to the bottom line of a business. There's definitely much more recognition, and CFOs are taking a much more forward interest in understanding employee experience, internal comms metrics. There's really interesting example. It's a unique one, but Airbnb CFO is also their head of employee experience. Now that's a very unique scenario, but like equally it goes to show that there is people are getting it, and so but they're still going to be interested in those numbers. They're thinking about the talent ROI, the cost and time to recruit. These are the things that are on their mind. Likewise, and also the CFO has probably funded a lot of projects, and so he's going to be kind of interesting on the ROI on those projects that he's shelled out for. Whereas our CIO, he's like looking at similar view, but from a tech standpoint. So he's going to have his own goal, probably trying to improve digital satisfaction, for example, justify the tech investments he's made over the last 3 to 5 years. But also ultimately we'll be looking to try and remove any friction from the employee's day that's in the digital area, and needs to prove that via kind of adoption of those tools. So if you kind of put that hat on, the mindset that they're on, what they're trying to do within their roles, if you look on the right hand side, then you see the type of data that they're going to need. So one of them is platform adoption, and that may sound obvious. Everyone wants to know a bit about platform adoption, but it's particularly key here because these are the people that made the choices. They made the choices, they shelled out for it. And also, if you've ever got a case of not being able to reach all your employees, frequently reporting on the number of employees that can access your platform, for example, is really important. Making sure that it doesn't become like sidelined. So that platform adoption is really important. This apps and tools one is really interesting. We've got a few customers who have used their kind of platform as a launch pad for all their other applications and tools in the organization. And what the kind of savvy internal communicators did was track how many times was each tool app clicked. And from then you can see there were actually some tools in the organization that were never clicked by any employee. So you can actually serve up some interesting information to the CIO to say, hey, there's 200 tools on our platform, actually 25% of them aren't used. And likewise, the flip side of that, you may highlight some tools that are highly adopted, and you may potentially find some opportunities to kind of bring in key actions into your like platform, for example, via like integrations. I've got one more on this that I want to talk about, which is ideation. This is an interesting one because whether you have your own ideas portal or whether you kind of got your ear to the ground looking at social groups or channels, being able to kind of be the interface and provide data on ideas or metrics, ideas that come from employees to this group will be really important. Whether it's cost savings, also the CIO has probably rolled out loads of tools that are software and need to be making incremental improvements, fine-tuning them. So anything you can do to support that, of course, will be really great. Then we move on to kind of more people-centric, typically more people-centric members of the C-suite, which is our CHRO, which I'm sure you'll be more familiar with working with, but also our CMO. And so a CHRO, I think the sorts of things they're going to be thinking about. They're going to be trying to improve employee retention. Of course, they've got their kind of more process-driven compliance areas as well. You probably have quite common shared goals, especially when it comes to onboarding. And your CMO is going to be thinking about everything external. So your brand perception, your how your employees are representing themselves, brand awareness as well. And so what that means is you've kind of got like chalk when you put these two groupings next to our CIO and CFO, you see their minds are just working differently. So things like, of course, your CHRO is going to be interested in those employee engagement surveys, but these guys will be much more intrinsically linked to kind of like social sentiment, understanding kind of what's bubbling under and what they can do about it. One thing that I really wanted to kind of highlight here was employee advocacy, which is a big thing at the moment. Your CMO will be interested if you have those capabilities. How much content are you producing that you're able to share externally? How many people are sharing it? What's the reception of that? How can we increase that? So you see there how you start to have a regular cadence over a topic. Likewise, if you win the IC awards, I know that IOIC awards are open now, aren't they? Are they?
Yes. Yeah,
Sometimes we get like a tendency to kind of like work with each other and like internal comms, but actually like those are really cool stories. And if you're like fortunate enough to be nominated or win something like that, it's really compelling. And so like sharing that externally is really important. And the final kind of metric I want to talk about here is for a HR function, they're probably the function that run the most campaigns across your organization to your employees. And so if you really want to support them with metrics, you can't be serving up, oh, there were this many views on this item, there were this many clicks on this email, because that doesn't tell the story. You have to kind of think about, right, what is that HR campaign? Is it benefits enrollment, for example? Okay, well, what's the aim of benefits enrollment? We know what the outcome we want there is. Yes, there's content underneath that supporting that, but like you need to give them essentially a health score that says, okay, was this campaign successful or not successful? What's other interesting context? How could you improve? What comms did well, what comms didn't? And therefore, what can they do next time that makes it a more successful benefits enrollment? I'm going to move on to our kind of final two members of the kind of fictional C-suite here. We've got our CEO and our COO. Our CEO being much more setting the vision, the strategy, being more strategic. The CEO, of course, interested in that, but is much more tactical on a day-to-day level. Now, our CEO is going to be thinking about aligning employees with our company strategy. So if we launch mission, vision, values, understanding how our employees delivering against that, and also are we enabling them to do that? Do they understand it? Are they on the same bus as us, going in the same direction? Will be really important to them. And also, I've been a bit cheeky here and put like perception of self and leadership team. But I think it is really important that as the figurehead of the company, they need to understand, okay, what content are they putting out? What's resonating? What's not resonating? What are people expecting from them? What that perception is. Your COO is a bit more tactical and will be interested in all that stuff, of course, but also will be tuned into any insights you can provide about department collaboration. Are there any silos forming that they can unpick? Also, there's kind of more like regular feedback mechanism. If you're running like town halls, for example, they should be kind of on the end of the feedback that comes out of that. So if you look at the data that they need, actually, I'm a big advocate of providing more storytelling data here. I've put an example of reward and recognition usage. I've seen a lot of companies create badges or kudos for values, right? Company values. And so being able to show these people, this is how many times this value kudos was awarded and this was what it was awarded for, is actually a real life demonstration of your values coming to life. And so you can measure that and tell that story. And there, of course, there are other ways sorry, go on, Jen.
I was going to say the other thing as well that we haven't touched on, we have touched on, but the other thing as well with the CEO is they're going to be concerned about, and you touched on it there, reputation, their own and the organisations, and the trust towards that. And that values and all that piece that you're just talking about on our own thing is fundamental. And we know reputation management can't be controlled in the old ways that it was. So if you can make those links, that's a really powerful thing that a CEO is also worried about.
Yeah, those. So anything that kind of social sentiment. Also, don't underestimate, as internal communicators, you get that you're always inputting data from your conversations, from your focus groups, from your interactions, and it doesn't have to just be an output of a report. That is data, knowing how to kind of compute that and put that in the right way. It is metrics and data. It's probably the most valuable. So that kind of provides you with a model for the kind of the C-suite. Of course, it's not a hard and fast rule, and there will be kind of differences. You may have different people on your board, and sometimes people take a particular liking to a certain data. I was actually going to say for these guys are always really interested in like the top, like the hot stories, the ones that got people talking, the vibe check, the one that's kind of creating a buzz. And so hopefully that kind of provides you with a model. Some of you may be able to get there with some of the data, some of it not so much, but it gives you an idea of the sorts of the way they're thinking. So whatever you can provide now, think in their shoes and kind of build those relationships that help to influence. We actually, if you have the right tools, hopefully that can kind of take out some of the effort for you. At Unily, for example, we have our kind of journeys feature, which allows you to essentially plan communication campaigns, build them in a way that's logical, strategic. So you're not doing those kind of point comms anymore, that you stitch all the communications together that makes sense and you measure it like that. And so if you can find the right technology, the output of that will hopefully take off some of the manual burden from you. So this is an example that kind of shows you a dashboard that is related to a comms campaign. So let's say an employee alignment campaign, for example, launching your new values. So here you can see the output isn't just, oh, we had this many clicks on this article, we had this many views. Actually, what you're getting is a smarter calculated score, because the reality is underneath the campaign is inner workings. There might be multiple content items. There may be a vlog, it may be a news item, it may be a form, it may be a video. Now, a campaign is kind of made up of all that content, and so the score is kind of smart calculating based on like your success measures. And so as a leader, it's much easier to interpret that score and think, okay, well, I can do better next year. What can we do to do better next year? Likewise, for those of you that are in the detail of working with content, creating content with your leaders, make sure that you don't get into the habit of just reporting on views. Depending on the type of content, if you've got like a video, for example, someone just viewing that video, well, how long did they view it for? When did they stop viewing it? Why did they stop viewing it? How can we then improve our video content next time so that they go further? And also I find like with this sort of approach where you get these scores, it kind of encourages people to like improve on themselves. So if you're running like annual campaigns for something, you can say, okay, well, we've got a score of 70 out of 100 this year. Let's go for 75 next year, and let's fine tune those comms to make sure we're getting the best engagement. And also it can kind of spark a bit of healthy competition between people as well. So that kind of rounds up our content. We've gone through the kind of the state of play, the kind of challenges that we have, looked at how we kind of make some of it work for our C-suite, how you can serve up different metrics for different people, and also some examples of tech that helps to get you there. So I will go over to the Q&A panel, and you can contribute questions now. I will see if anyone has been, yes, people have. So we've got quite a few questions here. We've got quite a few votes on as well. So I'm going to go fairly. So I'm going to go from the top question with the most votes. So, so this is from Rafaela. Several heads of communications I collaborate with express reservations about certain metrics. They believe that these metrics are not solely indicative of communications performance, but rather a reflection of combined efforts of various functions, such as HR, culture, and other work streams. Consequently, they fear that poor results may unfairly reflect on communications when in fact its performance depends on contributions of other departments. How would you deal with that?
Big question, difficult question. I think I just want to make sure I'm interpreting that correctly. So what I think I'm gathering from that is that there are some people that know that when they look at a metric, it's a collective effort, and therefore actually, how do we make sure that we're sharing that and demonstrating that collective effort? Whereas perhaps there's some fighting over that silo of impact. Kaz, is that how you're interpreting that?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I answer it correctly.
Yeah. So consequently, Philip. So kind of like we'll shy away from I guess it's about shying away from certain metrics because you're not wholly responsible for that. And so kind of, I guess, reporting on it is.
I think my view would be don't shy away from it. I know that sounds really like, well, that's easy for you to say, Jen, and I get that. But I think that it's about acknowledging, well, that's not our own, but it's drawing that, it's about that data holistic. So as long as you've got in the data that the points that are yours. So what have we done on, so let's just take an example. I'm trying to find an example. So say there's an issue with maybe HR or the CMO. Going back to one of the things that you're talking about is that there's a real issue around well-being or something that they want to fix, and right, or they're looking at a particular attrition or you can't say that one thing is all yours. But what you can certainly say is, well, that has been identified to us as an issue. We're collaborating and we're aligning ourselves on that issue. What we've done in comms is this, and we have seen this impact from our campaigns, the likes, the sentiment, the posts and the part. And also we've looked at the bigger, wider, and that seems to be changing. We're not saying that's all of it, but I think we can draw some kind of collaboration. But so it's how you tell the story of that rather than the ownership of it, I would say, Kaz.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. I also get it as well. Sometimes it's a culture. It's very, it's almost like there's been a kind of data culture for different departments, and some of it's quite hierarchical, segregated. So we're a little bit late to the party where some people have been part of that. But yeah, totally agree. I really like the next question.
It's the same
Yeah,
go for it.
No, sorry. This is from Lizzie Roberts. Love the shift towards more frequent feedback. Any thoughts on or guidance on balancing that survey fatigue and super saturating the employee?
Yeah, I think so. And I think when we talk about frequent feedback, that doesn't mean a frequent survey necessarily. It doesn't necessarily have to mean a frequent survey. But what I would say is that when you're looking at that frequency, if you do things like understanding an emotion and a sentiment, it can be, think of it as the example that Cav gave, I would say, think of pulse surveys, quick, sharp, get them in, get them done. So it's just a sentiment at the point of it. We're all in with airports, happy, smiley faces, low ones in your intranet, asking those points of view that just don't feel like you're writing to every employee going, dear, please complete this lengthy survey. Think about them embedding into some of the tools that you have and making them really brief. Also think about what do we have as regular listening points? Is there a point where you have a town hall? Does that map alongside when we do the survey? When do I actually perhaps collate what's going on in the listening in your enterprise social network or your comms channels? So you start to map all those things together, but just don't think of them as heavy survey, as a survey fatigue. Think of them as something that's quite brief. And the other thing I would say, if there is general survey fatigue in your people, make sure you do the you said we did. So if people feel like they're being heard and what's being acted upon, they're more likely to participate as well in the future. I don't know what you think, Kaz.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And also kind of, if you've got an opportunity to kind of reset, sit back and kind of plan it as a campaign, the same way you would be like, hey, well, we don't want to oversaturate, and maybe are there certain segments where you're not getting as good enough engagement and kind of like targeting there. So making sure like you've got targeted comms and it's not just blast communications will be really important. One more from Paul, which is beyond the open rate, how can you ensure the message is read and absorbed? I've got a couple of suggestions. I've got kind of my techie brain on, so I can go with those. So I've seen some of our customers do it in certain ways. Some they will have like quizzes created alongside it with like pass marks and things like that. But also some of the more kind of like Unity, for example, where you've got more evolved technology, looking at things like time to read. And so based on content, for example, if something takes 5 minutes to read and the average time spent on that is 10 seconds, and you know that's not being read and absorbed. And actually we sometimes use it as an indicator to kind of see, okay, how engaging was this? Did it keep people reading? So there are some more kind of technical solutions. Jen, have you got anything to add to that?
No, I would say there is technical things, and I think the other thing is what do you want them to get from that? Is it an informative piece? Is there a call to action that you want them to do? What's resonating? Test those theories as well, and it has to go down to that fundamental question: what do we want to get out of it? And if it is that we want people, we have to read that because there's a behavior change, and that's really important. And that's something. Is it because we think it's really important? What do people want to know and do? And I think that knowing what you're trying to achieve will help you understand what really needs to be looked at, if that's a kind of answer.
Yeah. Okay, that kind of brings us to time. We actually had so many questions, and I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of them. But what we will do is, well, we do have some resources. So if you go to fill in the feedback form, we do have some kind of extra resources there. There's like a content stream planner, which is kind of a bit like what Jen was talking about, kind of understanding how effective or whether you actually need that content stream, for example. Is it a lot of effort? Is it actually getting people engaged? Is it actually needed by people? Plugging in some of those questions, getting an output like, oh, actually, maybe we didn't need to create this piece of content, or we need to start creating this content. And yeah, so if you're able to go to unity.com/feedback, we'd love to hear anything, any suggestions. We will no doubt be partnering together again it'll probably be me and Jen. All feedback welcome. And thank you so much for tuning in.
Yes, thanks for having me. And it was brief, but as Kaz said, if there's anything the IOIC, feel free to reach out to us as well if there's anything that we can help with down the line.
Please get in touch. Metrics is a different one, but hopefully kind of we've inspired you to to go away and see the art of the possible, serve up different data to different people and tell the story.